in the fading shadows of April 1945, within the war-torn landscape of Frisoith, Germany, three young boys found themselves pressed against the rough, weathered planks of a barn wall, their wrists bound tightly with coarse rope that dug into their skin like unforgiving thorns. The air hung heavy with the chill of early spring, a deceptive season where winter's grip refused to loosen entirely, sending shivers through their slender frames, clad in oversized Wehrmacht uniforms that swallowed them whole. The youngest among them, barely scraping 14 years of age, fixed his gaze on the muddy earth between his scuffed boots, fighting back the hot sting of tears that threatened to betray his fragile composure. His helmet, far too large for his head, tilted precariously forward, casting a shadow over eyes wide with a terror that no child should ever know. Beside him sat the 15-year-old, his eyelids squeezed shut as if to block out the grim reality unfolding around him, his lips forming silent words in a desperate prayer whispered to a god who seemed distant in these forsaken fields. The oldest, at 16, held himself rigid, shoulders squared in a futile attempt to project bravery, though his bound hands trembled uncontrollably, betraying the storm raging within. They had been informed in curt, unforgiving tones by their captors that execution awaited them at dawn, a word that echoed in their minds like a death knell, one they understood all too well from the public spectacles back in their hometowns, where the SS enforced loyalty with ruthless finality. They had fired upon the advancing Canadian patrol, their bullets finding flesh, eliciting a scream that still rang in their ears, a sound that sealed their fate in the eyes of the victors. As the horizon began to bleed with the first hints of sunrise, shifting from inky blackness to a somber navy, and then to a muted gray, their breaths materialized in fleeting clouds against the frigid air, each exhalation a reminder of life's fragility. The cold seeped through their threadbare uniforms, offering no mercy, and one boy's teeth chattered in uncontrollable spasms, his body quaking not just from the temperature, but from the weight of impending doom. Then, cutting through the tense silence, came the low growl of an approaching truck engine, growing louder with each passing second, causing the boys to stiffen in anticipation. This was surely the vehicle come to transport them to their end, or perhaps to carry out the sentence right there against the barn. The youngest could hold back no longer. Sobs racked his small frame, tears carving clean paths down his grime-streaked cheeks. The middle boy accelerated his silent invocations, words tumbling faster in his mind, while the oldest shut his eyes tightly, steeling himself for the inevitable. But amidst this crescendo of dread, an incongruous scent wafted toward them. Sweet, warm, and utterly out of place in this theater of war. It was the aroma of fresh doughnuts, a fragrance they hadn't encountered in what felt like an eternity, evoking memories of peacetime bakeries and family mornings long shattered by conflict. The smell intensified as the truck halted nearby, doors slamming with authority, footsteps crunching the gravel in approach. The boys kept their heads bowed, unwilling to meet the gaze of their executioners, bracing for the cold steel of rifles or the bark of commands leading to oblivion. Yet, this wasn't the script they had anticipated. The war, in its chaotic tapestry, had woven an unexpected thread of humanity into their story. Mere weeks prior, these adolescents had inhabited a world far removed from the front lines, a realm of domestic normalcy where mothers prepared simple meals from rationed goods, fathers imparted practical skills like mending fences or tuning bicycle chains, and younger siblings provided endless sources of irritation and affection. Their lives revolved around schoolyard games, clandestine explorations of nearby woods, and the innocent aspirations that define youth, dreams of becoming mechanics, artists, or explorers. But the inexorable machinery of the Third Reich had intruded upon this idyll when Nazi officials descended upon their rural communities, conscripting every male over 13 into a desperate defense against the encroaching Allies. Clad in ill-fitting garb and armed with rifles that felt like leaden burdens in their untrained hands, they were indoctrinated with tales of heroism and the dire consequences of desertion. Families executed or deported to labor camps if they faltered. Fear, not fervor, propelled them forward. The weight of familial protection outweighed any personal terror. They marched toward uncertain horizons, their steps heavy with reluctance, digging trenches and foxholes while yearning for the safety of home. By this point, in 1945, the German war effort teetered on collapse, a fact evident to all but the most deluded ideologues clinging to Hitler's fading cult. The Soviet juggernaut advanced relentlessly from the east, while American, British, and Canadian forces pressed from west and south, carving through defenses with methodical precision. In the northern sectors, Canadian troops, battle-hardened veterans of campaigns in France, Italy, and the Netherlands, pushed through villages and farmlands, encountering resistance not from seasoned Wehrmacht regulars who had largely capitulated or fled, but from makeshift militias comprising the elderly and the very young. These Volkssturm units, dubbed the People's Storm, represented Hitler's final, frantic bid to stem the tide, arming children with whatever weaponry remained and dispatching them to hold lines that were already crumbling. The Canadians, having liberated horrors like concentration camps and witnessed the systematic barbarity of the regime, harbored a deep-seated fury exacerbated by the senseless prolongation of conflict. Friends fell in these twilight skirmishes, deaths that felt profoundly wasteful as victory loomed. The boys' ambush on the patrol had unfolded in this charged atmosphere, their shots wounding a soldier and inviting swift retribution. Dragged from their hiding spot in the barn, they were bound and left to contemplate their end, aware that international law permitted summary execution for combatants, regardless of age. Propaganda had painted the Allies as merciless fiends, tales of atrocity that now fueled their dread, convincing them that pain and humiliation preceded death. Yet, as the truck's arrival heralded not gunfire, but the improbable scent of baked goods, a shift occurred, a glimpse that perhaps the narratives fed to them were as fabricated as the regime's promises of eternal victory. The decision to offer sustenance over slaughter stemmed from a confluence of factors rooted in the Canadians' own experiences and the broader context of the war's denouement. To grasp why these soldiers, embittered by years of loss, opted for clemency, one must trace the origins of the Hitler Youth, the organization that had molded these boys into reluctant warriors. Emerging in the 1920s as a seemingly innocuous youth group emphasizing physical fitness, camaraderie, and national pride, activities like hiking, singing patriotic songs, and learning survival skills, it transformed under Hitler's ascent in 1933 into a potent tool for ideological indoctrination. Membership became compulsory for boys aged 10 to 18, with programs designed to instill unwavering loyalty to the Führer, portraying him as an infallible savior destined to elevate Germany to global supremacy. Lessons veered from adventure to propaganda, teaching racial hierarchies that deemed Aryans superior, and others, Jews, Slavs, Romani, subhuman threats to be eradicated. Parades, rallies, and paramilitary drills conditioned obedience, turning play into preparation for total war. As battlefield reversals mounted after 1943, with staggering losses in Russia and North Africa, the regime dipped deeper into this reservoir of youth. Initially, 17-year-olds were drafted into elite units, like the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, thrown into the cauldron of Normandy, where they fought with fanaticism born of brainwashing, suffering catastrophic casualties, yet delaying Allied advances at great cost. By 1944, desperation lowered the threshold to 16, then 15, and finally to preteens, with minimal training, often just hours on rifle handling or anti-tank weapons before deployment. Refusal invited immediate execution or familial reprisals, leaving no viable escape. These boys, products of this system, embodied the regime's moral bankruptcy, sacrificed on the altar of a lost cause. The Canadians opposing them were no strangers to sacrifice. Enlisting from diverse backgrounds, farmers from the prairies, laborers from industrial cities, clerks from quiet towns, they had endured the rigors of global conflict since 1939. Their path wound through the blood-soaked beaches of Dieppe in 1942, a disastrous raid that claimed over 900 lives and taught harsh lessons in amphibious warfare. They battled up the Italian boot, scaling treacherous mountains and assaulting fortified positions in Ortona, a house-to-house inferno dubbed Little Stalingrad for its ferocity. D-Day's Juno Beach saw them storm ashore under withering fire, pushing inland through bocage country, where hedgerows concealed deadly ambushes. The liberation of the Netherlands brought moments of joy amid horror, with grateful Dutch civilians showering them with tulips and cheers, a stark contrast to the sullen, fearful reception in Germany. Here, every advance met guerrilla tactics from civilians turned combatants, women lobbing grenades, elders sniping from attics, and children like these boys emerging from shadows with lethal intent. The psychological toll was immense. Post-traumatic stress, though unnamed then, manifested in nightmares, tremors, and a hardened cynicism. General Harry Crerar's 1st Canadian Army, navigating the sodden terrains of Emsland with its labyrinth of canals and dikes, faced relentless attrition, each mile paid in blood. The incident in Frisoith mere days before amplified tensions. The sniper's bullet felling Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Wiggle, a beloved leader whose death ignited a reprisal that razed much of the town, ancient timber-framed houses reduced to smoldering ruins in a cathartic outburst of grief-fueled destruction. This backdrop framed the capture of the 3 boys, their barn ambush wounding Private Campbell in a fusillade of panicked shots. Sergeant Morrison's patrol, veterans of too many close calls, stormed the structure, disarming the trembling youths amid shouts and confusion. The decision hung in the balance. Law allowed retribution. Anger demanded it. Yet as dawn broke, Captain William Chen arrived, his mixed heritage of Chinese and Scottish descent having forged a resilience against prejudice, now channeled into command. Kneeling before the boys, he saw not foes, but frightened children, echoes of his own siblings safe across the ocean. Ordering their bonds severed and sustenance provided, he bridged the chasm of enmity with simple acts: donuts from the mobile canteen, warm coffee to chase away the cold, gestures that dismantled the propaganda's facade. The boy's initial wariness dissolved into ravenous gratitude, bites taken tentatively at first, then with urgency, flavors exploding on tongues, starved of sweetness. Not all approved. Murmurs of betrayal rippled through the ranks, men like Private Davies wrestling with loyalty to fallen comrades. But Chen's rationale resonated. Mercy undermined the enemy's resolve, proving the Allies' moral superiority, fostering surrenders that hastened peace. Private Hoffman, drawing on his German roots, facilitated dialogue, unraveling tales of coercion, SS threats, and shattered innocence. Hans, the youngest, spoke of his farm life, the abrupt conscription ripping him from familial warmth. Friedrich confessed his initial zeal, waning into horror. Klaus articulated the impossible calculus of protecting loved ones at personal cost. These confessions humanized them, transforming abstract enemies into relatable victims, easing the soldiers' consciences. Medical aid followed. Corporal Jackson tending the grazed shoulder with professional detachment, bridging the divide through healing. As the boys were transported to POW facilities, waves exchanged in farewell symbolized nascent reconciliation, a microcosm of the war's endgame, where compassion accelerated collapse. This incident mirrored broader patterns: Soviets' vengeful executions, contrasting Western variability; Americans' mixed responses; British pragmatism, all influencing the rapid dissolution of resistance as mercy's strategic value emerged. Post-war, these boys' fates diverged. Hans rebuilding as a carpenter, Friedrich finding redemption through advocacy, Klaus succumbing to illness. Yet their stories perpetuated lessons of humanity's resilience, echoing in veterans' reflections and shaping alliances that redefined Europe. The donuts, mundane yet profound, symbolized choice: to perpetuate cycle or break it, proving that even in abyss, light persists through deliberate acts of grace. Expanding on this narrative requires delving deeper into the historical intricacies that framed such moments, ensuring the retelling honors the authenticity while illuminating the human elements, often overshadowed by grand strategy. The Hitler Youth's evolution from voluntary club to compulsory indoctrination machine was meticulously engineered, with Reich Youth leader Baldur von Schirach overseeing a curriculum that blended adventure with ideology, annual rallies at Nuremberg captivating thousands with spectacle and rhetoric. By war's outset, over 7 million boys were enrolled. Their uniforms, brown shirts, black shorts, swastika armbands, symbols of conformity. Military training intensified post-1941 with air raid drills, weapons familiarization, and anti-aircraft duties, preparing them for total mobilization. The 1943 shift to combat roles followed catastrophic losses at Stalingrad, where an entire army was annihilated, prompting decrees lowering conscription ages amid manpower shortages exceeding 2 million. Units like the Hitlerjugend Division, comprising 20,000 teens, debuted in Normandy's Bocage, their fanaticism, fueled by years of propaganda, inflicting heavy casualties on allies, with battles like Caen seeing youths charging tanks with grenades, dying in waves but delaying timetables. Survivors recounted the disillusionment, the propaganda's veneer cracking under fire's reality. Yet coercion persisted, SS overseers executing deserters to enforce compliance. In Emsland's flat expanses, Canadian advances encountered these youth in fortified farmsteads, their inexperience evident in erratic fire, but lethal nonetheless. The Free Soith reprisal, while regrettable, reflected war's dehumanizing effect, investigated post-war, but understood in context of accumulated trauma. Chen's intervention, drawing from personal ethos shaped by discrimination overcome through merit, exemplified leadership that prioritized long-term victory over immediate vengeance. The mobile canteens, operated by volunteers from organizations like the Salvation Army, provided not just nourishment, but morale. Their donuts, fried in makeshift kitchens towed by trucks, evoking home's comforts amid desolation. The boys' consumption, crumbs falling from lips unused to such treats, marked a sensory rebirth, flavors mingling with relief's tears. Hoffman's translations revealed nuanced backstories. Hans' rural idyll interrupted, dreams of apprenticeship deferred. Friedrich's paternal loss, fueling initial patriotism, shattered by front's brutality. Klaus's covert skepticism, nurtured by a dissenting father, clashing with enforced duty. Jackson's medical care, applying sulfanilamide powder and gauze, underscored shared vulnerability, wounds transcending uniforms. As the truck departed, laden with blankets and provisions, the gesture rippled, encouraging nearby holdouts to surrender, hastening local pacification. Comparable incidents dotted the front. American GIs in the Ruhr sharing chocolate with captured teens. British Tommies in Hamburg offering tea to surrendering youths, each act eroding the regime's hold. Soviet contrast stemmed from unimaginable suffering. 27 million dead, including civilians massacred in occupied territories, fueling retributive justice, with orders from Stalin permitting summary executions, though some commanders spared the youngest. Post-war denazification, via questionnaires and tribunals, aimed to purge ideology, with youth programs re-educating through democratic principles, Allied films exposing atrocities. Veterans like Chen and Morrison carried the weight, their choices affirming identity amid horror, narratives shared in memoirs and interviews preserving the ethos. Descendants, benefiting from peace, trace lineages to these pivots, European integration embodying reconciliation's triumph. Thus, the story transcends anecdote, illustrating war's paradox. Destruction begetting renewal through humanity's deliberate preservation. To further enrich this retelling, consider the logistical underpinnings of Canadian operations in 1945, where supply lines stretched from Normandy ports through liberated territories, ensuring troops received hot meals via field kitchens and auxiliary services. The donuts, a staple from North American culinary tradition adapted for morale, were produced in batches of hundreds, their yeast-raised dough fried in vegetable oil, glazed with sugar, scavenged or rationed, distributing warmth in literal and figurative senses. The boy's physiological response, salivation triggered by aroma, dopamine release from sugar, contrasted starkly with prior deprivation, rations limited to ersatz bread and thin soups. Psychologically, the act disrupted conditioned fear, propaganda's tales of Allied savagery disproven by empirical kindness, fostering cognitive dissonance that accelerated ideological shift. Historically, similar mercy instances influenced surrender rates, with intelligence reports noting increased white flags in western sectors versus east, attributing to treatment disparities. POW camps, like those in Rheinwiesenlager, though overcrowded, segregated juveniles, providing education and vocational training to reintegrate them, many released by 1946 as non-threats. Long-term, these survivors contributed to Germany's Wirtschaftswunder, their experiences informing a collective aversion to militarism, embedded in basic law's pacifist clauses. Veterans associations, like the Royal Canadian Legion, commemorated such stories in annual remembrances, emphasizing ethical warfare. Thus, the narrative weaves individual choice into historical fabric, demonstrating mercy's enduring power. As the war's final convulsions gripped northwestern Germany in late April 1945, the landscape bore the scars of prolonged conflict, cratered roads, shattered villages, and a pervasive atmosphere of exhaustion mingled with lingering defiance. The Canadian First Army, under General Harry Crerar, had transitioned from the welcoming embraces of liberated Dutch towns to the hostile reception of German soil, where every hedgerow and farmhouse concealed potential threats. Soldiers navigated boggy terrains that bogged down armor, forcing infantry to bear the brunt of advances, their senses heightened by the knowledge that victory was imminent, yet peril persisted in these dying throes. The destruction of Frisoith on April 14th, ordered by Major General Christopher Vokes of the 4th Canadian Armored Division in retaliation for the death of Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Weigel, killed by German paratroopers amid rumors of civilian involvement, left a smoldering testament to war's capacity for escalation, with flames consuming centuries-old structures and rubble repurposed for road repairs to facilitate the push toward Oldenburg and the Kustyn Canal. This act, carried out by units like the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada, underscored the raw emotions surging through troops who had endured years of attrition, their patience frayed by senseless resistance that claimed lives mere weeks from peace. Yet, even in this environment of reprisal and hardening resolve, pockets of restraint emerged, where individual commanders and soldiers confronted the moral crossroads of vengeance versus humanity when facing the regime's youngest conscripts. The broader campaign saw Allied forces encountering increasing numbers of juvenile combatants, products of the Volkssturm and depleted Hitler Youth formations, armed with rudimentary weapons and driven by coercion rather than conviction. These encounters varied by unit and circumstance, some ending in swift executions justified under the exigencies of combat, others in captivity marked by pragmatic mercy, recognizing that these adolescents posed diminishing threats as the Reich crumbled. Canadian troops drawing from diverse civilian backgrounds and tempered by campaigns across Europe often grappled with this duality, the instinct for retribution clashing against an innate sense of fairness, amplified by the visible youthfulness of many opponents. In rural outposts and farmsteads surrounding contested towns, patrols routinely flushed out small groups of defenders, elderly men clutching outdated rifles, women assisting with logistics, and boys whose uniforms betrayed their inexperience through loose fits and awkward postures. The psychological impact on the Canadians was profound, having liberated camps revealing Nazi atrocities and buried comrades from protracted battles. They viewed prolonged fighting as futile cruelty, yet the sight of child combatants evoked conflicting responses: pity for the manipulated, anger at the regime that deployed them. Official policies allowed for summary measures against armed resistors, but field decisions hinged on commanders' discretion, influenced by immediate losses, intelligence on coercion, and the overarching goal of minimizing casualties as surrender waves began. Mobile auxiliary services, including canteens providing hot beverages and baked goods to sustain frontline morale, became inadvertent instruments of de-escalation in select instances. Volunteers, often from charitable organizations, prepared simple comforts like freshly fried donuts, dough kneaded with limited ingredients, shaped and cooked in portable setups towed behind supply vehicles, offering fleeting reminders of home amid rationed monotony. When confronted with captured youths, some officers opted to distribute these items, a gesture that pierced propaganda veils portraying allies as barbaric invaders intent on annihilation. The act served multiple purposes: alleviating immediate hunger from deprivation, signaling non-lethal intent to encourage compliance, and psychologically disarming captives conditioned to expect torment. Translations facilitated by bilingual soldiers or locals revealed consistent patterns: conscription under duress, threats against relatives, minimal instruction before deployment, humanizing the enemy and shifting perceptions from threats to casualties of fanaticism. Medical treatment followed in compassionate cases, medics applying field dressings to wounds inflicted moments earlier, bridging enmity through shared vulnerability. These decisions, though not uniform, contributed to accelerating capitulations. Word circulated among holdouts that Western allies, particularly Canadians and Americans, afforded fair treatment, contrasting starkly with Eastern Front horrors and undermining remaining resolve. Prisoner processing centers swelled with surrenders, juveniles segregated for quicker release or re-education, exposing them to unfiltered histories that dismantled indoctrinated worldviews. Veterans later reflected on such moments as defining their service, not the victories in battle, but the restraint exercised when power permitted otherwise, preserving personal integrity amid systemic brutality. The strategic ripple extended post-war, fostering environments conducive to reconstruction and alliance building, where former adversaries integrated into democratic frameworks, their experiences informing aversion to militarism. In quieter recollections, soldiers pondered the fragility of choices, how a simple provision of food could redirect trajectories, sparing lives and sowing seeds for reconciliation in a continent ravaged by ideology's extremes. The enduring legacy lay in demonstrating that, even as empires collapsed in flames, individual acts could reaffirm shared, countering the momentum toward dehumanization that war inexorably fosters. Expanding upon the personal dimensions, survivors of these encounters navigated profound readjustments. Young captives, released amid chaotic demobilizations, returned to devastated homelands, confronting familial losses, infrastructural ruin, and collective guilt while grappling with their coerced roles. Many channeled energies into rebuilding, vocational trades, community labor, gradually integrating truths learned in captivity about the regime's deceptions. Veterans, repatriated to peacetime pursuits, carried introspective burdens, some documenting experiences in journals or conversations, emphasizing mercy's quiet valor over combat's clamor. Auxiliary personnel, unaware of specific impacts, took pride in sustaining troops through small comforts that occasionally transcended frontline divides. Historians, piecing together fragmented records from war diaries and oral testimonies, highlight these vignettes as counterpoints to reprisals, illustrating the spectrum of responses in war's terminal phase. The mobile canteen's role, logistical yet pivotal, exemplified how mundane support functions intersected with pivotal human interactions, their outputs, warm, sugared treats, becoming symbols of unexpected grace. Physiological relief from sustenance intertwined with emotional upheaval, captives processing kindness amid anticipated hostility, catalyzing shifts in allegiance from imposed loyalty to pragmatic acceptance of defeat. Broader doctrinal evolutions post-conflict incorporated these lessons, refining prisoner handling to leverage psychological advantages, reinforcing that humane treatment expedited resolutions and mitigated protracted resistance. In national narratives, such episodes bolstered identities of honorable warfare, distinguishing forces through ethical conduct amid adversaries' excesses. Descendants, inheriting relayed anecdotes, perpetuate appreciation for forebears' discernment, fostering cross-generational dialogues on conflict's moral complexities. Thus, amid the ashes of 1945's spring offensives, fleeting intersections of compassion endured, proving resilience against war's erosive forces, affirming that deliberate benevolence could outlast destruction's immediacy. To delve further into the operational realities, Canadian supply chains in these closing weeks strained under demands for fuel, ammunition, and sustenance. Yet auxiliary units prioritized morale boosters like baked goods, recognizing their role in sustaining psychological endurance. Donuts, adapted from domestic recipes with available fats and sweeteners, provided caloric density and sensory uplift, distributed during lulls or post-engagement. Encounters with youth defenders often unfolded in isolated settings, barns, ditches, wooded edges, where small unit leaders exercised autonomy, weighing tactical imperatives against emergent empathy upon close inspection of captives' ages and demeanors. Intelligence intercepts and interrogations corroborated coercion narratives. SS enforcers shadowing conscripts to prevent flight. Familial reprisals as leverage. This context informed lenient dispositions, transferring juveniles rearward for processing rather than on-site resolutions. Comparative Allied approaches varied. Soviet advances prioritizing overwhelming force, with minimal quarter, due to accumulated grievances. American units displaying inconsistency based on recent casualties. British emphasizing documentation and restraint. The Canadians navigating a middle path shaped by prolonged exposure to both liberation's joys and occupation's grimness. Post-war testimonies from processed youths described pivotal realizations. Sustenance offered freely contradicting atrocity propaganda. Medical aid, without strings, eroding distrust. Denazification initiatives, though uneven, exposed participants to evidentiary presentations of regime crimes, prompting internal reckonings that facilitated societal reintegration. Veterans associations preserved these accounts, annual gatherings recounting not just engagements, but ethical dilemmas resolved favorably. The narrative's persistence underscores war's dual potential for profound degradation or redemptive affirmation through choices made in fleeting, high-stakes moments. Ultimately, these understated interventions contributed to swifter pacification, conserving resources and lives as collapse accelerated, embedding mercy as both moral imperative and pragmatic tool in military ethos. The story, woven from disparate threads of duty, fatigue, and innate decency, endures as testament to humanity's capacity to prevail even when circumstances conspire against it. Continuing this exploration reveals the intricate interplay of fatigue and principle in soldiers' decision-making, years of combat eroding illusions, yet preserving core values in many. Patrol routines, methodical clearances of structures, heightened vigilance against ambushes, culminated in confrontations where outcomes hinged on split-second assessments. Captured youths, disarmed and bound initially for security, presented opportunities for de-escalation once threats neutralized. Gestures of provision, sharing rations, lighting cigarettes, bridged linguistic barriers, eliciting tentative reciprocity and information flows that aided advances. Medics, adhering to oaths transcending sides, treated injuries with available supplies, actions observed by peers reinforcing unit cohesion around shared humanity. Commanders like those in armored brigades balanced discipline with flexibility, endorsing mercy where it aligned with objectives, aware that exemplary treatment propagated through networks, encouraging mass yields. The canteen's contributions, logistical footnotes in reports, assumed outsized significance in personal narratives, their products catalyzing breakthroughs in understanding. Survivors' trajectories varied, some thriving in renewed societies, others burdened by survivors' remorse. Yet collective experiences informed Germany's democratic consolidation, aversion to authoritarianism rooted in lived consequences. Canadian identity, similarly, drew strength from these contrasts to adversary conduct, peacekeeping traditions, tracing lineages to wartime restraint. Thus, the era's closing acts, marked by both destruction and deliverance, illuminate war's profound lessons. That victory's true measure lies not solely in conquest, but in preserving decency amid temptation to abandon it. As the echoes of artillery faded across the battered plains of northwestern Germany in the spring of 1945, the incident involving the 3 young boys and the Canadian patrol lingered not as a grand battlefield triumph recorded in official dispatches, but as a quiet testament etched into the memories of those who lived it, a fragile thread of decency woven through the fabric of an otherwise unraveling war. The truck carrying Hans, Friedrich, and Klaus rumbled away from the barn on a rutted farm track, kicking up dust that mingled with the lingering smoke from distant fires, their bound destinies now redirected toward uncertain futures in Allied prisoner-of-war compounds rather than unmarked graves beside a cold wall. Blankets draped over their shoulders and parcels of additional rations clutched in their hands provided meager comfort against the lingering chill. Yet these simple provisions carried weight far beyond their material value, signaling a reprieve from the propaganda-fueled nightmare that had convinced them surrender meant torture and oblivion. As the vehicle disappeared over the horizon, Sergeant Morrison stood watching longer than the others, his rifle slung loosely, a faint nod acknowledging the small wave from the youngest boy, a gesture that bridged the chasm of uniforms and languages in a way no formal armistice ever could. Captain William Chen turned back toward his men, the weight of his decision settling not as burden, but as quiet affirmation. In choosing sustenance over summary justice, he had preserved something essential, not just for the captives, but for the souls of his soldiers, who had witnessed too much darkness to risk adding more. The mobile canteen volunteers, oblivious to the full drama unfolding mere yards away, continued frying batches of donuts in their portable setups, the sizzle of dough and hot fat, and the rising aroma serving as unwitting instruments in a larger symphony of de-escalation that played out across countless similar encounters in those final weeks. Word of such treatment spread swiftly through fragmented German lines, whispers carried by runners, deserters, and civilians, that the Western Allies, particularly the Canadians, fed prisoners rather than slaughtered them, that medical care extended even to those who had fired the shots moments earlier, eroding the last psychological barriers propping up resistance. Holdouts in nearby villages and farmsteads began lowering rifles and raising white flags with increasing frequency, entire platoons of mixed-age defenders emerging from cellars and attics to capitulate en masse, sparing lives on both sides as the inexorable advance continued toward the North Sea ports. Prisoner intake facilities, hastily expanded behind the front, groaned under the influx, yet procedures adapted to segregate juveniles, routing the youngest toward accelerated processing and release, while older teens underwent structured reorientation programs that confronted them with irrefutable evidence of the regime's atrocities, dismantling years of indoctrination, one documented horror at a time. The boys' individual paths diverged in the chaotic aftermath of capitulation, each trajectory shaped by age, health, and the capricious fortunes of post-war dislocation. Hans, the 14-year-old with tousled brown hair and a farmer's practical dreams, benefited from policies prioritizing minors, walking free by summer's end to trek homeward across a landscape of ruined bridges and refugee columns, his mother's embrace at the battered farm gate, dissolving months of terror into tears of astonished reunion. Friedrich, older and thus retained longer for formal denazification, endured classroom sessions exposing the Holocaust's scale and the Eastern Front's carnage, the revelations shattering his lingering illusions and igniting a lifelong pursuit of atonement through quiet advocacy and interfaith reconciliation. Klaus, the thoughtful 16-year-old who had silently questioned authority even under duress, survived initial captivity only to succumb to illness amid the privations of early release, his potential extinguished just as peace dawned, a poignant reminder that mercy, though granted, could not always outrun war's lingering toll. Captain Chen returned to Canadian soil aboard troop ships laden with weary veterans, the Atlantic crossing affording time for reflection on choices that defined character more than any medal. Decades later, as a history teacher, addressing wide-eyed students, he would recount the barn incident, not as anecdote of combat prowess, but as proof that moral courage often demanded restraint when power permitted excess. Sergeant Morrison, resuming civilian life as a police officer in Ontario, drew upon that morning's lesson in countless interactions, opting for understanding over force when circumstances allowed, his war journal's final entry on the event, underscoring that true valor lay in lowering the rifle to extend a hand, or a cigarette, to a frightened child. The canteen workers, anonymous in larger histories, continued their service through VA Day and beyond, their thousands of donuts distributed across fronts, unknowingly facilitating moments where sweetness supplanted bitterness, nourishment, nurturing nascent trust. Veterans' gatherings in subsequent decades inevitably circled back to child combatants, gray-haired men exchanging stories not of vengeance fulfilled, but of opportunities seized to remain human, unanimous in gratitude that they had chosen paths preserving their own humanity amid systemic madness. The strategic dividends of aggregated mercy manifested in accelerated collapses along Western fronts, mass surrenders, conserving ammunition, and blood as the Reich's final defenses evaporated, psychological warfare proving as decisive as armored thrusts in hastening unconditional surrender. Post-war doctrines absorbed these insights, refining prisoner protocols to emphasize humane treatment as both ethical imperative and force multiplier, influencing Geneva Convention updates and training curricula that stressed dignity's role in conflict resolution. Germany's reconstruction, propelled by Marshall Plan investments and domestic resolve, benefited from survivors' testimonies that countered lingering distrust of occupiers, personal accounts of fair treatment, building bridges where official diplomacy alone might have faltered. The rapid evolution from bitter enmity to NATO partnership within a decade owed subtle debts to countless unreported acts of restraint, seeds of reconciliation planted in muddy fields and barnyards by soldiers who refused to mirror the brutality they opposed. Descendants of both captors and captives inherited a Europe transformed, borders porous for travel and trade rather than battle lines, the European Union emerging as institutional embodiment of lessons learned from war's abyss, that former foes could forge enduring cooperation when victory tempered with magnanimity rather than vengeance. Hans's grandchildren, raised in prosperous unity, would one day stand in Ottawa's War Museum, gazing at exhibits depicting their grandfather's near-fatal front, silently thanking anonymous Canadians whose kindness rippled across generations. The donut, ephemeral fried dough glazed with scarce sugar, transcended its simplicity in that pivotal April dawn to symbolize choice's profound power, to perpetuate cycles of hate or interrupt them with deliberate grace, proving that even as empires crumbled in fire and ruin, individual humanity could endure, adapt, and ultimately prevail. In the broader tapestry of the 20th century's defining cataclysm, grand strategies and monumental battles rightfully claim prominence, yet the quieter interludes, moments when rifles stayed silent and provisions crossed enemy lines, revealed war's deeper truths, that enemies are manufactured by systems, not born, that youth bears no inherent culpability for leaders' sins, that mercy constitutes strength rather than weakness, and that treatment of the defeated shapes the peace more enduringly than treatment of the victorious. 3 boys braced for bullets received life and, indirectly, contributed to hastening deliverance for millions by exemplifying that propaganda's lies dissolved fastest under kindness's light.